All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of TechEd. Are you having a good event so far? I hope so, and welcome back to the SharePoint track, and welcome, as I said earlier, to Houston, Texas. I hope you enjoyed your walk here this morning. I was just amazed how far away this place was. It was incredible. But I'm glad you made the trek. I think you're in for a great session, and welcome to Upgrade and Migration Strategy and Tactics. My name is Dan Holm. Many of you were in my session yesterday, but a quick introduction to myself. I'm an MVP in SharePoint Server and have been for about 7 years. Prior to that was an MVP in Active Directory. And I've been working with the Microsoft stack for almost 2 decades now, I'm sad to say. I'm currently living in beautiful Maui, Hawaii. This is what it looks like outside of my home. And this is the beach I get to hang out at the few days a month that I'm actually home. But I spend my time traveling around the world, literally, to all 7 continents, working for a boutique consulting company called Intellium. And we provide consulting and guidance and training services to businesses around the world, primarily large Fortune caliber organizations is who tends to reach out to me. And one of those customers that I spend a lot of time talking about is NBC Sports, for whom I'm the Microsoft Technologies consultant during the Olympic Games. Many of you know I served that job for the last 4 Olympic Games, and we just last week kicked off the SharePoint farm for the Sochi Olympics, the Winter Olympics of 2014, coming February to a TV station near you. As I work with companies around the world, I tend to get a lot of questions these days about SharePoint 2013 and Office 365, how they align with business needs, what's valuable about these platforms, what's the right way to approach them, what's the right path. And that's what this session is really about. Microsoft wanted me to bring in a summary of a best practices discussion of what I hear from my customers around the world. So this session is 100% coming from the meetings that I have with these customers. I also spend time writing. I write books, including the SharePoint 2010 Training Kit. And we will actually be doing a book signing down at the AvePoint booth at 2. I don't know exactly how many copies of the book they brought. It's usually 20 or 30, so the first people in line get a free copy, and that's again at 2 o'clock at the AvePoint booth. And I also write for SharePoint Pro Magazine, and so you can follow my weekly column on SharePointProMag.com. But the most important information on this slide is my contact information. I'll put it up at the end of the session as well. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want to carry on this conversation after today and use me as a resource as you're trying to evaluate your approach to these new technologies that are rolling out faster and faster. This is really a space I spend a lot of my time in the business alignment of SharePoint, along with governance and administration and all the things that make SharePoint tick. So please do reach out to me. My job is to help you be successful with SharePoint. I learn as much from you as I hope I can contribute to you, so please do carry on the conversation. And again, I'll have my email address up at the end. The tiny.cc URL is where I put all of my presentations, and later on today I'll upload this deck as well as my deck from yesterday. But of course, at TechEd, these slides will also be available for you on ComNet, so you can get them from several places. So with that then, we are here today, this morning, to talk about SharePoint and Office 365. And this is a strategy session. This is about business alignment, about making decisions about your roadmap. This is not, as I mentioned at about 8:15, this is not the technical session on how do I do a content database attach into a SharePoint 2013 farm. That technical session is going to be done by Chris McNulty later on this afternoon. He's covering all of the advanced scenarios of service application upgrades and all those kinds of things, the bit level stuff. But before you do that, you really need to make some very important decisions. And we're going to look at these. We're going to look at this roadmap by answering a number of questions. You saw them looping through before the session. And my goal is really to provide some insight, some clarity, and some balance to help you understand what enterprises are planning, what they're doing, and then use that information to make decisions in your own organization. I also will provide some technical guidance. There'll be a small amount of guidance as far as how do I upgrade or migrate, but again, the real hard technical information will be Chris's session this afternoon. And of course, we'll be answering questions along the way. So if you've got questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand, and I'll be sure to get to those. So the way we're going to approach this session is, in fact, to present questions. These are the kinds of questions I'm sure many of you have already in your heads, and the questions that I hear from my customers. Starting with, why SharePoint? What is it about SharePoint that makes it a compelling platform at all versus competing platforms? And this is most of us know the answer to this question already in some form or another, but it's an important level to set right at the beginning. And this might be a bit of a controversial statement, being that we're all here at TechEd and we're all here to talk about SharePoint. But honestly, I think SharePoint doesn't matter. In the end, SharePoint is just a technology, and it doesn't matter. In fact, it's business that matters. Business needs to get things done. Our business is asking us as IT to help. And SharePoint as a platform has functionality and capabilities that can solve business problems. And where it can solve business problems, SharePoint begins to matter, when it can deliver business value or decrease risk. And both of those are very important. And it's interesting, as someone who serves as an analyst and an industry observer, to watch the customer base go through cycles between value and risk. For several years after SharePoint 2007 was released, particularly, there was this huge interest in SharePoint as a platform that delivered value. And then several years after that, around the 2010 timeframe, I found more customers interested in SharePoint for places that it reduced risk, where, for example, they could reduce their exposure to data leakage by implementing information rights management, or collecting data that was in disparate silos and putting security controls around that data through SharePoint, improving compliance, those kinds of things. And now with 2013 and Office 365, we're starting to see an uptick in the interest in functionality again in the business value. But SharePoint only matters where it can actually do something for your business. And that's an obvious statement, but it's an important one because it's going to play very directly into our more specific questions about when and how do we move to SharePoint 2013. So let's talk about why should I consider SharePoint 2013. Many of us, actually, I'd like to find out, how many of us are using SharePoint, let's start with the earliest ones. How many of us are using versions of SharePoint earlier than 2007 or v3? All right, there's always a few. Right on. Congratulations, you're the brave. And what about 2007 or WSS v3? Wow, that's impressive. And 2010? Okay. And how many are already in a production sense, whether big or small, using 2013 on-prem? Okay, and Office 365? All right, that's a good mix. That's about what I would expect. So why should those of us who don't have 2013 or Office 365 consider that? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to go back in time into ancient history, into the year 2006. The year 2006 was the year that Microsoft finished creating Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007 and WSS v3. That was the year that they sealed up that code and said, let's RTM it. It was around September, October of 2006. And let's think about our lives and the world we live in relation to September of 2006. And let's take a look at at that period of time based on some of the trends that impact us all today. What was this technology in September of 2006? What was Facebook? Not even available to the public. It was only available to high school and college students. It didn't exist. It didn't even play in our vocabulary in the enterprise, or for most of us at all. This very important revolutionary change and what it represents as far as social networking and the way we communicate and the expectations we have of technology, not even on the map. And what about this device? Many of us would say this was the device that changed the entire culture of devices. And the fact that now we're influenced by this whole BYOD trend, the consumerization of IT. What was the iPhone in September of 2006? Didn't even exist. It was released in summer of 2007. So in other words, 2006 was a pre-Facebook, pre-iPhone world. And what else happened in late 2006? Microsoft decided what was going to be put in to SharePoint 2010. So it was in a pre-Facebook, pre-iPhone world that Microsoft decided what SharePoint 2010 was going to be. SharePoint 2010 was not informed by anything that's relevant to our world today. Let's think about what happened in this ensuing 5 years. In the ensuing 5 years, people and their relationship to technology changed significantly. The workforce is so much more technically literate today, thanks mainly to the devices they carry. They have very high expectations of what that technology can do for them, and they are less patient. They have a basic approach to the world that if there is a problem, there's an app for that, right? That is the world we live in. The millennials that are entering our workforce never knew the world before the internet. And even our aging population understands technology. Most of us have parents or grandparents who use devices. My parents have a Surface and an iPhone and an iPad. It's simply not an issue for them anymore. And I don't know if you've seen the latest Microsoft ad about Windows Phone, but it's where the Android and the iPhone people get into a battle at a wedding. And one of the lines is when the Android people looks at someone with an iPhone, this person's probably 75 years old, and the line is, "Aren't you a little young to have an iPhone?" The world now has now really has changed. The devices we carry are things we couldn't have even imagined in 2006. The way we connect with each other and our expectations about having a voice and having that voice heard has changed significantly. The cloud was something on the horizon in 2006. Now it's prime time. It is absolutely affecting us every day in our personal and professional lives. And then there's the issues of control. IT is now under increasing burdens from both government and internal forces to ensure security controls around information that is now being distributed outside the corporate firewalls onto devices we don't even own or manage. And we're dealing with data in quantities and sizes that we've never dealt with before. The world changed a lot in the 5 years since Microsoft decided what SharePoint 2010 was going to be. And so with that in mind, when you're thinking about SharePoint 2013 was designed for this world that we live in today. And so when you're asking yourself, why should I consider SharePoint 2013 versus SharePoint 2010? The answer is SharePoint 2010 is so 2006. And that's kind of a flip way to say it, but it's true. It was not designed in 2010. It was designed in a pre-Facebook, pre-iPhone world that simply isn't relevant today. And if you put it in place, thinking you're going to be able to address today's workloads, you're wrong. Because today's workloads are going to require things like mobile device access and standards and HTML5 and all these kinds of things that just simply weren't around when Microsoft put together what was a very good product. 2010 is an excellent product in 2009 and 2010. Now, so with that in mind, when should you begin moving to SharePoint 2013? This is the next question I tend to get from my customers. And my answer is, don't wait. There's a broad culture in IT for a variety of reasons in different organizations that we should wait till the next release, maybe for budgetary reasons, or we should wait for Service Pack 1. Now, I completely understand why that culture exists. I've been in IT long enough to remember Windows 2000 Service Pack 2 and the debacle that was. I remember SharePoint 2010 Service Pack 1, or some of the SharePoint 2007 Service Packs that broke things. I know why we think we should wait for Service Pack 1. But that is a legacy way of thinking that simply doesn't apply anymore. And there's a couple of reasons for that. In the end, SharePoint, what the bottom line here is going to be is that SharePoint 2013, at its current state, is well past the level of stability and reliability that other products have been at a Service Pack 1 or even Service Pack 2 level. And there's reasons for that. First and foremost, Microsoft, for the first time ever, actually runs its own software. When SharePoint 2010 was released, BPOS, Business Productivity Online Services, was in the cloud, and Microsoft ran that as its own business line. And then about a year after 2010 was released, in the summer of 2011, Microsoft upgraded to Office 365 with the 2010 line of products. And at that time, they did something very interesting, which is they turned the service over to the product teams, which meant instead of this random business over there running the cloud, now the people who make SharePoint run SharePoint in Office 365. If something goes wrong in Office 365 and there's an escalation, eventually it lands in the lap of one of the engineers who write the code for SharePoint. They're the ones whose pagers go off at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning if something really bad is happening. And you can bet they fix that. And Microsoft is now, for the first time ever, delivering their own software to real customers. Microsoft has hundreds of millions of customers in Office 365 who are running SharePoint 2013 before you're even going to begin to be able to put it in place on-premise. So the product has been tested to a scale that I would argue no technology product has ever been able to be tested at, simply because it's being run in the cloud for hundreds of millions of customers. Now, Microsoft has always dog-fooded their own product. They've always rolled it out internally up to their own users, and that was their way of saying, yeah, we've tested this. And they've had the technology, the technology adopter programs that give them a little bit of feedback. But I would argue Microsoft's internal dog-fooding isn't really good feedback because Microsoft's employees are not normal people. Microsoft's employees are used to change. They're used to being guinea pigs and working with betas. They're used to working around problems if something is broken. How many of you would say your users fit those characteristics? Not so much. So Microsoft has never really run their own software in a real world. They've waited for feedback from customers. And while they had the early adopter programs, it was really post-release that real feedback started coming back. And Microsoft was able to identify what didn't work, what didn't scale, what needed to be fixed in a Service Pack 1. Again, when SharePoint 2013 was released in November, there were already hundreds of millions of customers running the preview version in the cloud, and Microsoft addressed the problems. The kinds of things I saw released into SharePoint 2013 between preview and final are very closely aligned with the types of things that used to be released between RTM and Service Pack 1. So the product simply, that way of thinking just isn't applicable. And there's one other reason this isn't applicable. Did you notice in the announcements that Windows Server 2012 R2 was released? There wasn't yet a Service Pack 1 for Windows Server 2012. We are now in a versionless world. It's an agile release cycle that Microsoft is in, and that's a good thing for a lot of reasons, because under the hood, they're making upgrade and migration a lot easier too. It's now an issue of new versions coming out at a much faster frequency, and Microsoft has said they're going to do a 90 to 120-day release cycle in Office 365. They've not yet announced what they're going to do with SharePoint on-premise, but just look at the keynotes this week and do the math yourself. If you wait till Service Pack 1, you may be waiting past the next release of SharePoint. So that whole mindset, just simply you have to get past it and don't wait. And the other big reason for not waiting is, remember that employee base that we were talking about earlier? They're not going to wait. If they can't get what they need from IT, they will go outside of IT and start using consumer services. And there have been a couple of studies recently that showed that within enterprises, well over 50% of enterprises, I think it was closer to 70 or 80, reported that their workforce was using some kind of consumer service, whether it was Facebook or Dropbox or something like that. And in this room, how many of you know that there are non-enterprise services, consumer-grade services being used for work in your organizations? There you go. Business won't wait, and they need their problems solved. And it's either up to IT to step up and deliver it in a managed, secure way that ensures long-term manageability and compliance for your organization, or to expose your organization to risk in the near and long term by allowing users to just go around you, which they will do. I've had a couple of very interesting conversations with high-level business users recently that said things in this many words. We're the ones with the budget. If IT can't deliver, we will go around them. I also had a very high-level business executive tell me, IT is an adversary, not an emissary. IT is really, for a number of reasons that we all understand, gotten into a corner because we've been asked to do so much for so long with so little money that we're fighting so many fires, we have lost our ability to really deliver business value in many cases, and we've got to step up and start doing that because business won't wait. So when exactly should you upgrade? Well, assuming that your business won't wait, you really don't want to delay. You want to start looking ahead and start thinking about how to move forward. And my guidance for this little question is going to come from a statement that I heard from the CIO of one of the world's biggest banks, who said, as we look back at our upgrade projects over time, they've provided little or no value. An upgrade on its own, heavy lifting from point A to point B, provides very little value because you're not delivering new functionality, you're not delivering business value, you're just simply upgrading a technology. And because of that, this big bank is saying we need to stop focusing on upgrades and start focusing on moving forward. And there's a difference there. The difference is you keep your eyes on the new business workloads that are coming down the pike and decide what to do with those, and just simply upgrading becomes less important. So you focus on what business workloads, what solutions can be delivered that will increase value or decrease risk. And only later in the process do you start looking at what is existing and start saying, what in the existing set of workloads can we upgrade to add value or decrease risk? And at some point, yes, you will upgrade everything because part of risk is you now have an unsupported platform like SharePoint 2007, which is technically no longer supported. So at some point, you've got to incorporate that in your risk and keep moving everything forward. But it's really about moving forward and then worrying about what's behind you rather than doing heavy lift upgrade projects. It's about being agile. So how should I move forward? Let's talk specifically about a roadmap and what I'm seeing as a trend towards a reasonable approach for moving forward in this new agile, versionless world that we're starting to face here. And let's assume that this represents your current state. What we've got here is basically a SharePoint 2010 environment supporting a number of business workloads at the top of the stack. Now, we'll come back and talk about 2007 and Office 365 later, but we'll start with the typical on-prem 2010 environment. So this is your current environment. My first guidance to you is deploy SharePoint 2013 into your service portfolio now. Get it installed. Even if it's just in a dev environment, even if it's or a test environment, even if it's on one server rather than a whole farm, get it going. And once you've got it in your service portfolio, then you can start figuring out what's going to deliver value or decrease risk, either for the business or for IT. And one of the first things I'd suggest, and all of this is documented in this slide, so I'm going to skip through the documentation and focus on the pictures here, is consider creating first a 2013 services farm. Now, what that means is there are a set of services that can be federated across farms. Search, metadata, user profiles, business connectivity services, and secure store. So those services can be moved into a 2013 farm and then published to your 2010 farms. So you haven't changed your 2010 farms at all. You've just put search and metadata and user profiles in 2013. Your 2010 farm is now consuming those services. Now, under the hood, you as IT now have a more scalable, robust service platform that you're running these new services on. Your business hasn't changed at all. They don't see any new functionality. They don't see any difference. I mean, you could do it over the weekend and no one would be any the wiser. Because the down-level farms, while they can consume the services from the up-level farms, they don't add new functionality. They just are accessing service. Then you take the next little step, which is you say, okay, now that we've got search running on our 2013 farm, why not move our enterprise search center into 2013? So that when users do an enterprise-wide search, they're actually using 2013 search, which is out of this world. As you know, FAST is no longer a separate product. All the functionality has been rolled into 2013. 2013 search is one of the shining success stories of 2013. So you put your enterprise search center in that services farm, and now you're getting new functionality when users use that search center. You also think to yourself, well, maybe we should start doing My Sites on 2013 and start leveraging SkyDrive Pro so users can take their documents offline. And maybe you move your My Sites into 2013. But your main content and everything else is still 2010, still your content farms down there. But you're starting to take advantage of the capabilities of 2013. Sorry? No, 2007 farms, because there was no service application model, cannot consume from 2013. But what you could do, you could put search in 2013, and that would be your enterprise search center. 2013 can certainly crawl your 2010 farms, but if someone, or 2007 farms, but if someone's in 2007 and does a search within their team site, that cannot consume 2013 or even 2010 search. So, you know, there might be some options there. New workloads like My Sites you may not have done in 2007. Just put those in 2013 because you don't have them yet. But there's no cross-farm publishing in 2007. Other questions so far? All right. Also, similarly, get Office 365 into your service portfolio now. Don't wait until the day your executives come to you and say, oh my gosh, we've got the board meeting next week, and we really need to share stuff with the other board members. Get Dropbox for us. Don't wait for that day. Get Office 365 going. Get your domain configured. Get it all sitting there so that the day a workload comes that you don't have time to respond to, you don't have to worry about Office 365 at that point in time. And think about similarly, think about what workloads you might be able to immediately move into that. I think Office 365, especially for most businesses, Office 365 is kind of a no-brainer for extranet. It takes away all the burden of punching holes through your firewall and managing external access. It takes away the burden of authentication. The sharing model is so good now in 2013 in Office 365. It's free. You don't have to pay for licenses for external users. It's just kind of a no-brainer for typical extranet kinds of sharing scenarios. And then once you've got these things in place, start delivering innovative solutions to drive business value. So this is the step where you start thinking, what does our business need that we haven't done yet, and where should that now go? And you can choose whether to put that new workload on 2010 or on 2013. And the odds are it's going to be better on 2013 because 2013 was built for today's world. Even a team site today is much better in 2013. It works across browsers, it works across devices, it gives you mobile access in much significantly better ways than 2010 did. And so, generally speaking, any workload that's new is going to probably be better to support on 2013. And we'll come back and talk about that point in a moment. But you'll start putting new workloads on 2013. And then, one other piece of advice related to this is please don't deploy what I would call big bet workloads on 2010. Now, big bet workloads are the workloads that Microsoft invested heavily in for 2013, and they are mobile. If you're going to do a workload, if you're trying to deliver some kind of functionality that involves mobile access, it's going to be painful in 2010. It simply wasn't very good, and you're going to have to turn to third-party vendors much faster than you would have to in 2013. So don't reinvent the wheel. Microsoft solved many, not all, but many of the problems with mobile access. Social networking. Friends don't let friends do my sites in 2010. They're much better in 2013 for all kinds of reasons. And now you've got the integration of Yammer coming and all those things as well. Search, as mentioned, search is completely re-architected, brand new, basically all that's really the same as the name. Really awesome, big win on 2013. In fact, I really wish Microsoft would just peel it off as its own product because search is so high value, I think it should be pulled out of SharePoint and just here's Enterprise Search, Microsoft Search. Web content management. Intranet and public-facing website kinds of things where you're really talking about web pages and websites. WCM in 2010 was not very different than WCM in 2007. WCM in 2013 is very different. It's much more standards-based, the style sheets, the JavaScript, the HTML5, everything about it starts aligning more with the way businesses really want to do public-facing websites as well as intranet scenarios. The way you design and manage branding and master pages. All of that stuff is just so much better. So those big bet workloads should not be put on 2010 because you'll end up reinventing wheels and spending money and spending brain cycles that Microsoft has already moved way past in the last 5 years since they started developing 2010. So that's sort of the step-by-step roadmap, I would say, from a very high level. And again, all of this is in the slide deck. You're going to have access to the slides, so don't feel like you have to take a million pictures. And what you'll end up with is what I would call a true hybrid platform, which is not just what's on-prem and what's in the cloud, but on-prem having multiple versions, recognizing the fact that new workloads might be better served on a newer product, and moving forward and incorporating that into your service portfolio, and letting the legacy platform stay in place until it really makes sense to upgrade them based on increased business value or decreased risk. So what about those of you, many of you, who raised your hands who still have 2007? Very common question I get, should I skip 2010? Well, I'm going to answer this with a diagram that I call my 2010 versus 2013 decision chart. And this is what it looks like. Ask yourself first, what are we trying to do? What's the business need we're trying to achieve? And then ask yourself, can it be done in 2010? If the answer is yes, it can be done in 2010, it can be done better in 2013. Honestly, I've yet to find a workload that could be done in 2010 that can't be done better or even significantly better in 2013. Now, if it can't be done in 2010, then you can ask yourself, can it be done in 2013? And if so, well, then it's 2013. And if not, look for something other than SharePoint. This is a decision tree so simple that even a CIO can understand it. And I'm being cheeky, obviously, but the real answer is the stuff that can be done on 2010 can be done better on 2013. It's just that simple. Now, I'm not saying 2013 is perfect. There's a lot of net new stuff that's new in 2013 that has rough edges. The app model has some rough edges. Social, still a little bit, confusing is what Microsoft's telling us and where they're going to go, a lot of unanswered questions, some rough edges. But the stuff that could be done in 2010 is better on 2013. The stuff that's new, beware, be careful, and govern your environment well. Yeah. His question is about migration paths from 2007 to 2013. This, really, what I'm talking about is sort of the business decision. Then there's the technology. And Chris will talk about this afternoon. But there is no direct upgrade path at all from a technical perspective from 2007 directly to 2013. What you have to do, if you're going to use out-of-box tools, is take your 2007 farm, upgrade it to 2010, and then immediately move those databases into a 2013 farm. So you're going to have a 2010 farm sitting in the middle for temporary purposes. Now, to make a long story very short, you could do that over a weekend. You could take 2007 and migrate it to 2010 on Saturday, attach the content databases to your new 2013 farm on Sunday, and be done with it by Monday morning, from a technical perspective. Now, of course, the hardest part with any upgrade from 2007 is all the customizations that you did in 2007. And in 2007, many of us did things that effectively break the farm. And that will be very difficult to upgrade to 2010. So the very hardest part of upgrading if you're in 2007 is customization remediation. And you've got to do all of the pre-upgrade checks, all of the testing in your lab to know what does and doesn't work. And as soon as you've cleaned your 2007 farm up enough to go to 2010, if you can do that step, you might actually be best served by immediately going to 2013 and not letting anyone do damage to your 2010 farm. Just literally do that over a weekend. The hard part is the 2007 remediation and knowing that you can move forward from it. Once you can move forward from it, it's purely just technical bits, and it's upgrading, and that part is fine. The other thing you can do, and I honestly think is a better move, is start looking at your third-party migration tools. Because the other challenge I see in most 2007 environments is that they were built in 2007 and 2008, and the business needs they were trying to solve have changed. The technology and the way it can solve those needs has changed a lot, so the way you might want to do it in 2013 would be very different than the way you did it in 2007. So when you look at all those things, the complexity of remediation, and the fact that so much has changed in the last 5, 6, 7 years, you're better off with a third-party tool that will allow you to take smaller bits, move them around, change your architecture, do all those things as you do your migration. Third-party tools are really valuable for any migration, but particularly from a pre-2010 version to 2010 or 2013. Other questions at this point? All right. So moving forward. Now can we upgrade? now it's like, Dan, can we upgrade at some point? No, not yet. You can't really upgrade. You're going to migrate. Now, in this case, I'm not really saying migrate with third-party tools. I'm saying from a conceptual perspective, upgrade is dead. There is no such thing as the typical upgrade that many of us think of, where we take a 2007 farm and put in a DVD of 2010, and all of a sudden it's a 2010 farm. In-place upgrade no longer exists. So Chris McNulty, again, this afternoon is going to go into all the details about this, but I do want you to have a high-level view of what upgrade is now, and because then we can take that and use it to make more decisions. From a high level, you will not upgrade your 2010 farm. You will always build a new 2013 farm. You must do that. Now, it can be done in virtual machines, so you could theoretically take your 2010 server, put in a VM of 2013, and you could even do it on the same physical hardware, but it is two separate instances, two separate virtual machines at least. So you create your 2013 production farm, and then you copy your databases from your 2010 farm to your 2013 farm. After you've done that, you attach your 2013 farm to those databases, and at that moment, the databases are upgraded. Now, during these second and third steps, you're going to want to have your 2010 farm set to read-only so that users aren't making changes while you're in the process of upgrading that specific database. But it is now only a content database attached. That is all you do now. There is no in-place upgrade. Now, the really cool thing is what happens next, because this existed in 2010. But what happens next is really interesting. And to understand why this is valuable, let's take a step back and talk about 2007 to 2010 upgrades. So when you went from 2007 to 2010, first of all, you had to do all this remediation of customizations because a lot of stuff that worked in 2007 simply wouldn't work in 2010. That was problem number one, and that was a big problem. Problem number two was training. Because as soon as you went to 2010, potentially you were going to have to retrain all your users about the new interface and all the new functionality. And so Microsoft addressed that second problem by giving us what was called Visual Upgrade. And what Visual Upgrade was once you were in 2010, you could keep it looking kind of like a 2007 farm. It had a 2007 master page, and it hid some of the functionality so that users thought they were still in 2007, and then you could reveal the interface when you were ready. But behind the scenes, it was a 2010 farm now. It was a 2010 set of content. They were just sort of masking that with Visual Upgrade. So that was the way it used to be. Now, when you go from 2010 to 2013, something really magical happens, which is your 2013 farm still has the 2010 root folder, what we call the 14 hive, C, program files, Microsoft shared, blah, 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 bin, 10, or 13 and 14, 14 and 15, I should say. So your 2010 farm still runs your site collections as 2010 site collections. All the features are still there, all the templates and site definitions are still there. In most cases, if you install third-party tools that enhanced that sort of functionality and added a feature in 2010, that will still work. So it's almost like your 2013 farm has a split personality. It's a 2013 farm, but when you attach an old database, it says, oh, I'm going to run you as 2010. And it's not just visual. It's actually using a different underlying root folder to provide that functionality. So that is very, very cool. And in addition, your 2013 farm still supports your 2010 workflow engine, your 2010 customization models, Full Trust, Sandbox, for example. And so the bottom line here is you've upgraded your farm and nobody knows except for IT. IT now has a more scalable, more easy to administer underlying platform, but users aren't really impacted as much. And what this means also is that the need to remediate customizations is significantly lower going from 2010 to 2013 than it was from 2007 to 2010. 2007 to 2010 is gruesome. Even your fabulous 40 templates have got to be basically ripped out of your farm. 2010 to 2013, pretty much, things are going to work. Now, it's not a 100% guarantee, and you always want to test, but I can tell you a couple of things. One is I've heard very few screams of pain. And this is the first time in my history with technology that an upgrade has produced very few screams of pain. So this is working pretty well. But there's only one in the architecture of it. The only architectural element that's a concern is that while your 2010 and 2013 farms are each using their own root folders, they're sharing one set of DLLs, the Microsoft SharePoint DLLs. And so if you have something that relies on a legacy API, that will probably break. But the amount of things that do that are pretty small. So as I talk with customers and developers, I think this is much better than an 80% solution. We're probably ranging in the 90 to 95% solution where anything you upgrade is probably going to work. Test it, but you're probably going to be very, very happily surprised. So you upgrade into 2013, you attach your content databases to a 2013 farm. They still run as 2010. And then over time, you can, by site collection, upgrade those to 2013 mode. And literally, it's like telling the site collection, stop using the 2010 root folder, start using the 2013 root folder, and change the interface. And now, flip into a 2013 site collection. And even once you do that, it's site collection by site collection, so your legacy site collections still continue to run as 2010. You can, through PowerShell, actually continue to create site collections in 2010 mode. So it's a really, really slick solution. From a security perspective, farm administrators can do the entire thing, but you can also delegate to site collection administrators the ability to upgrade their site collections when they want. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. So this new model of upgrade, where basically the underlying platform can be upgraded without impacting the users or the functionality they're getting, is the big change. It's a really big change. It's not 100% perfect yet, but it's pretty darn cool. Now, why did Microsoft develop this? Remember I mentioned they're supporting real customers for the first time? They've got 100+ million customers in Office 365, whatever the number is, it's huge. And all of them were running on the 2010 version of the product. Microsoft had to upgrade their Office 365 cloud to 2013. And they can't do it and expect hundreds of millions of customers to get trained and change the way they behave every day. And so they had to split what's being presented as functionality from what is supporting the platform. And so it's all about Office 365, and we on-prem are now benefiting from it. So if you have an Office 365 tenancy, you might very well, actually let me skip this slide, I'll come back to it. You might very well have seen something like this. This was emails that I got for one of my old Office 365 tenancies. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I got a note that said, on June 2nd, we're going to upgrade your tenancy to Office, to the new versions of the platform. And it was very specific about the date. Earlier this spring, people were getting sort of squishy messages. We are going to upgrade you sometime over a 2-week period. People hated that. They're like, I need to know exactly when in order so that I can watch and be ready in case something goes wrong. So now they're saying, on June 2nd, we're going to upgrade you. Then I got a message on June 2nd, congratulations, it's been upgraded. I went to my Office 365 tenancy, and it looked exactly the same as it always did. No difference, except for a little bar at the top, because I'm a site collection administrator that says, experience all that SharePoint 2013 can offer, start now. And as a site collection administrator, that was my link to upgrade to 2013 functionality and interface. It's that simple. I can do it at my own pace when I need to. And so all of this was about the cloud. And so in the end, as we look at upgrades now, there's two types of upgrades. There's version to version, which is what we've been talking about so far, and there's build to build, which is when you have a patch or a service pack or something like that. Version to version, you only can do database attach now. The only option is create a new farm and attach your databases to it. But the good news is Microsoft is getting us closer and closer to the point where we literally can do it over a weekend without impacting users. A little bit of planning, a little bit of testing, of course, but it's so much better than it was before. Build to build, you can do either a database attach or in place. So if you have your 2013 farm and you've got a cumulative update, yes, you can apply that directly to your farm. But I don't recommend you do. This new model is so interesting and so valuable that I think what you need to consider starting to do in your organization is when a cumulative update comes out, treat it as a database attach. Instead of upgrading your existing production farm, create a couple of new VMs. Hopefully by this point you've got it pretty well scripted. If not, I can help you do that. Script out your farm. It takes me literally an hour and a half to create an entirely new SharePoint farm at this point. Install the cumulative update in it, and then attach your content databases from your old version to your new one and down those VMs. So in other words, roll your patches forward rather than installing your patches into your production farm. That's what Microsoft does in Office 365. When they've got patches, they do not patch their production cloud. They're rolling out new VMs with the patches and moving the databases over, which if you've ever gotten a message that said, we're improving your service, there's going to be some downtime for an hour on Saturday night, that's what they're doing. And it's the way to move forward. And if you get good at that, if you get good at rolling your farm forward, it means whether it's a patch, a cumulative update, a significant service a security patch, or a new version, it's going to be an over-the-weekend process for you, which is what you want it to be. You want it to be as easy for your business customers as it is for Office 365 now, where you can tell your business, we're upgrading your farm, we're finished, and they come back to work the next day and nothing's changed. That's what you want to be delivering on-prem as well. So now we get to the question of, do we go to Office 365 or do we stay on-prem? And this is obviously a big question, and Microsoft really is pushing Office 365 hard. We all know that. It's, all of the Microsoft employees are being measured very heavily on Office 365 migrations and licenses. But we still, in the real world, have a lot of on-premise services, and we need to think about, do we move forward and what do we move forward? So in Office 365, the first question you need to ask yourself is, which cloud should I be using? There's software as a service, hosted IaaS, managed IaaS, and private cloud. And so there's more than one flavor of cloud. There's more than just Office 365. So software as a service is Office 365. There probably are other versions, but the reality is Microsoft's will always be the most up-to-date and probably the cheapest. Then there's hosted IaaS, which is the category I would put Windows Azure VMs into. On the keynote, we all saw a lot about Windows Azure VMs, and they are ready for prime time. The new pricing model makes them, in many cases, a no-brainer for dev and test environments, for disaster recovery, for small teams. Azure VMs are very, very cool, and you could run your SharePoint farm or a subset of it in Windows Azure VMs and be very well served. There's also competing products like Rackspace and FPWeb.net and others who play in that hosted infrastructure as a service space, where you're basically given your own VMs and can make your decisions. Then there's managed IaaS. And that box for me is when you hire a major IT organization, like say HP or Hitachi or someone like that, to manage your cloud. And the physical machines may be in their data centers, they may be in yours, but they're not some public service. You're basically outsourcing the management of your cloud. And then there's the private cloud. And that's a key term. I really hope that over the next 12 months, our entire community goes away from calling it on-prem and starts calling it private cloud. Because we should be delivering the elasticity and the flexibility and the responsiveness of the cloud on-premise. We should be treating our on-premise service as a private cloud. It should have the same value. And now we can use the Windows Azure pack, which they announced on Monday, to actually manage our private cloud as if it's Azure. And we can start being smarter about our on-premise environments. Now, each of these environments have advantages and disadvantages. And you really want to think about the workloads that are appropriate in each of these environments. Now, what I'm going to say here is actually documented in hidden slides in the deck, so when you download the deck, you'll see this. But the real point is that none of these clouds is perfect. Each of them has limitations. What's the biggest limitation of the private cloud? What we used to call on-premise? It's expensive. Takes a long time, a lot of politics. And now we know it's going to always be out of date because Microsoft's going to be releasing new stuff into Office 365 every 90 days. So the private cloud, that's its big disadvantage, is really cost and effort. What's the biggest disadvantage of the Office 365 cloud? Well, one of the biggest ones is that it doesn't do everything. There are certain things that the Office 365 cloud isn't good at. Public-facing websites in Office 365 currently leave a lot to be desired, to say the least. Business connectivity services, very tough to get it punched back through your firewall to connect to your back-end data systems. And there's other, and anything that involves the content search functionality, which is a great new feature of 2013 that allows you to pull content from lots of places and present them in one place. It's really good for web content management and intranets. That isn't enabled in Office 365. So there are workloads that Office 365 simply isn't yet ready for. But you can bet your bottom dollar that because Microsoft is now very clearly cloud first, those holes, those gaps are going to be filled in real fast. What I'm saying today will be out of date 3 months from now, for sure. But there are certain things that Office 365 isn't well suited for. And then there's the infrastructure as a service model, which is kind of, in a way, a best of all worlds. Microsoft manages the hardware, the physical hosts, and all you need to do is manage your VMs and the software and services you're running on them. That's a pretty interesting option, but it has pluses and minuses as well. So align your workloads with the cloud. Some workloads belong on-premise, some belong in Azure VMs, some belong in Office 365, and again, that's going to be your hybrid. Your hybrid is multiple versions, multiple clouds, but what you want to do is abstract that complexity for your business and basically just say, here's the value we're providing you. Here's the collaboration service. Here's the search service. Here's the business insight service. Create services that you present to your business as a business solution, and they don't need to know or care, so to speak, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. And the reality is today it might be on-prem, tomorrow it might be on the cloud, or even vice versa. All this complexity of the underlying platform should be abstracted to them because you've become agile enough to simply manage these service portfolios. It's not easy. I'm definitely not saying this is easy, but it's where we need to be in order to serve our business customers. As we talk about the cloud, there's always concerns about the cloud. And so this question is, but what about blank in the cloud? There's always people who have concerns, and some of the concerns are real and some of them are not. So this next little bit is sort of about my discussions with customers related to their concerns. And concerns fall into a couple of categories. The first of which is lack of flexibility. We cannot customize the cloud the same way we do our on-prem environments. We can't do full trust solutions, for example. Security. What about security in the cloud? The cloud is less secure than my on-premise environment. The cloud doesn't meet XYZ regulation that I'm subject to. Data sovereignty. A big thing right now in Australia, for example. We believe, or in New Zealand, let me use that as an example. We can't allow data to be put into the cloud because the government says that because Microsoft's data center is actually in Singapore, we're not allowed to use Office 365 for these workloads. Where does the data actually sit and live? And data loss. What happens if the cloud disappears, if my connection to it disappears? So these are some of the concerns. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the discussions that need to be had. These are not necessarily aligned one-to-one with these concerns, but they're broad considerations. The first of which is there are difficult choices to be made. There is no perfect solution. Our business wants a silver bullet. We cannot promise them one. It simply doesn't exist. There are difficult choices that need to be made. And let's align that first with this concept of lack of flexibility. We can't go to Office 365 because we must have full trust solutions. We've built all kinds of stuff using full trust solutions, and they won't run in Office 365. Let me tell you a story. One of the biggest companies in the world is moving full bore into Office 365. Everything is going into Office 365. That means they won't have customizations anymore. And in order to make the difficult choice, they looked at their existing customizations. They said, what have we done? What business value does it provide? what cost does it incur, and what risk does it expose us to? And when they looked at business value, not as high as they originally hoped. When they looked at risk, much higher than they realized, because all those customizations meant they weren't able to patch their farm as quickly as they should, which meant they were exposed to security vulnerabilities from patches that hadn't been applied yet. I've been in very big customers that haven't even applied Service Pack 1 to SharePoint 2010 yet, and that is scary. There's a lot that's been security patched in 2010 since Service Pack 1. So they had to make a difficult choice, and their decision was no more customizations. If it exists now, we're going to find an alternative, and if we need to do something in the future, we're going to use the app model. We're going to build service-oriented architectures, and in the end, those are a lot more valuable for so many reasons anyway. So we're going to make the big transition. We've hit the tipping point where we now understand service-oriented architecture. We understand building applications for the cloud. Just draw a line and move into the cloud. They made a difficult choice. Certainly wasn't an easy one. Perception versus reality. Sometimes what we think is not necessarily the reality. This does, in fact, come into play a lot with security, where organizations think, oh, Microsoft's cloud isn't as secure as what we have on-premise. I've worked in Department of Defense organizations and contractors, and I can tell you very few of them have security as high as what Microsoft is being forced to implement by the EU and other regulatory bodies. When they really looked at their service account security, their administrative credential security, and these are really secure organizations, there was a lot to be left. And as soon as you move out of those into normal businesses, the security is generally nowhere near what Microsoft is able to implement in their cloud. And so Microsoft security is much higher than we give them credit for, and ours is usually a little bit less than we would like to think. And then there's also, well, let's actually move on to the next one here, incomplete knowledge. Sometimes you just don't know everything that's going on, either in the cloud or on-premise, and I'll tell you a couple of stories here. One of which is something I learned recently. How many of you know what ITAR is? Anyone in here? Okay, ITAR is a U.S. Set of regulations that basically are dealing with the export of information. What information can cross which borders? So it's an information export sort of thing. And in especially Department of Defense environments, there are certain classes of information that are subject to these ITAR regulations. And so when a lot of organizations were starting to look at, do we go to Office 365, they said we can't because we're subject to these ITAR regulations. I just discovered approximately 2 or 3 months ago that there is a version of Office 365 for ITAR. I was blown away by that. I had no clue it even existed. It's a flavor of Office 365 dedicated, but one of my DoD contractor customers notified me that they were moving to it, and I was like, wow, I didn't even know it existed. If I'd known it would have existed, I would have been able to help other similar customers know that that was an option. Another example of incomplete knowledge is when we don't necessarily know what our business is already doing. There was a bank in Ireland that was looking at moving collaboration to Office 365, and they were very concerned about doing that because of their perception of the U.S. Patriot Act. And the U.S. Patriot Act, which was put in place after 9/11, basically says that if data lives on a service owned by an American company, the U.S. government, under very specific extreme sort of scenarios, can get to that data. It's not a wide open door. There's all kinds of things you have to go through, but it's possible. And there were a couple of interesting stories that come out of that. So their general concern that we're in Ireland and we don't want the U.S. government seeing our data, and so the U.S. Patriot Act means we can't use Office 365. Their incomplete knowledge was that just down the hall, Human Resources was using an HR system on IBM's cloud. They had already decided, you know what, our business needs are greater than the U.S. Patriot Act. We're putting our stuff on IBM's cloud. IBM is a U.S.-owned company, too. So that was one example. Another is that most people haven't really looked at their own country's laws. The U.S. Patriot Act is very high visibility, but I can guarantee you almost every country on the planet has something that under an extreme scenario, certain hoops can be gone through for the government to get to information. In the U.S., it's called a subpoena, where you're getting sued and certain information can be requested and you have to turn it over. So most countries have very similar kinds of laws. We just aren't as aware of them as we are. And one other example is an organization in Australia that was concerned about data sovereignty. And there's like, well, no one in our organization uses any service outside of Australia because we're subject to these things. Then they found out the CEO had been using Dropbox for a year to share stuff with board members. And one other example came out of New Zealand a couple of weeks ago, where they were telling me data sovereignty is required by the New Zealand government. We have to keep data sitting on data centers in New Zealand. And then there was someone from the New Zealand government there, and they said, in this room of people, they said, that's what we thought, but no one's been able to provide us the actual regulation. It's kind of like an urban myth. We don't think it actually exists. And so, yeah, in some places it does. Again, perception versus reality, sometimes there is reality, but the bottom line is there's a lot more mythology around the cloud than real understanding of it. And even when we know something today, we may not know what changes in 90 days. That Microsoft locks down or improves, that there's a new version of Office 365 for ITAR, for example. These things are changing real fast. Microsoft is adding data centers in Australia, and I'll be shocked if they don't put some Office 365 there, because data sovereignty in Australia is required in certain scenarios. So we have to stay on top of these things and make real decisions. I think the number one thing that we're concerned about is this. When you really boil it down, a lot of IT's fear comes from the thought that we're going to lose our jobs. And I could not disagree more with that. Let me tell you a story, and then I'll tell you my opinion on it. The story was very large, Fortune 10 organization, CIO talking to a consultant. This is real. Telling the consultant, this is about 2 or 3 years ago, what can I do to my on-premise Exchange environment to lock it down so that it can never be migrated to the cloud? In other words, she wanted to time bomb it. Why? She really liked the Exchange administrators. There's 2 Exchange administrators, and she didn't want to lose them. She, honest to goodness, was sacrificing the flexibility and forward movement of her entire Exchange service simply because she liked the guys she worked with and that worked for her. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's great that we like each other, but it's not the right decision to make for the business. So this is a very real concern here, which is job loss. Now, I personally think if all you like to do is move bits around, there is a potential concern for that. Because basically, the kinds of things that many of us have done for the last 20 years in IT, if you're going to be doing them in 5 years, you're going to be working for Microsoft or Amazon or Google. The data centers are moving to the cloud very, very, very quickly. The good news is, I personally think this is the most exciting time to work in IT that I've experienced since about 1995. This is a tipping point where all of a sudden, we have the ability to be freed from a lot of the mundane work that many of us really don't like. We don't like getting called at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning to add a user to a group or to restart a server. These kinds of infrastructure plumbing things are being moved to the cloud, which liberates us to solve problems. And in order to solve problems, which is why many of us are in IT in the end, we now can listen to the business, hear what they want, find really cool new technologies. We get to play with the new stuff again, and figure out how to piece those together in a manageable and compliant way to solve those problems. I think this is the most exciting time ever to be in IT if you, in fact, like to play with technology and solve problems. And it means we're going to have to be more business analyst focused, more broad-looking in what we look at with technology, and less worried about what's the command line to attach a content database. That's less of a concern. But it's a really exciting time to be in IT. And I think it means jobs will be transformed rather than lost. And it will be in very exciting ways. One of my favorite customers last year rebranded IT. It is no longer information technology. It is now innovation technology. And they have, over the course of 9 months, changed the culture in the entire bank so that IT is now, people get excited about IT. When someone from IT walks down the hall, they say, oh, hey, I'm trying to do this. How would I do this? Instead of calling them up when something's broken. And IT now is providing value to the organization. They sit at the table in discussions that they never got to sit in before. The entire profile of IT has changed. So while job loss is certainly going to happen, I think it's actually much more, there's much more opportunity than risk. So those are the things that I try to step customers through and feel out. And I'm not saying that the cloud is right for everything. It isn't. But it's right for a lot more than we give it credit for. And so at a bare minimum, we need to be ready to address new workloads and put them in a software as a service cloud, a hosted cloud, or a private cloud on premise. We need to be ready to do those things to help our businesses move forward. So look at your business requirements. What is your business trying to do? What are the service levels you need? What are the features you need? And decide which cloud to put them in. As far as migration to the cloud, this is a big bummer. And I don't think Chris is going to talk much about this afternoon because there's not much to say. One of the big bummers about Office 365 is you can't migrate to it. using out-of-box tools. Microsoft hasn't yet given us anything to heavy lift us into the cloud. I'm sure that will come, but it's not what they've done to date. So there's no out-of-box tool set. You're going to be using third-party tools to migrate to the cloud if you do choose to migrate. A lot of organizations I know are simply doing their own heavy lifting, basically copying and pasting document libraries to the cloud and things like that. Management of the cloud is still a challenge. Administration is more limited. What you have access to, you have to figure out new ways of doing things. Backup, restore, and disaster recovery are trickier, particularly with Office 365 when you don't have your own VMs that you're managing in the cloud. And so definitely consider these things as you look at the cloud. What do you need for backup and restore and disaster recovery? This actually takes me to another story about concern about the cloud. Back in New Zealand again, there were a number of law firms that a couple of years ago were evaluating whether to move to Office 365, and they decided they couldn't because of privacy regulations and security concerns and blah, 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 blah. These were all law firms in Christchurch, which you may know basically got leveled by an earthquake, and they lost all of their customers' data. Even their backup vaults were leveled to the ground. So guess what they're doing now? They're moving stuff into the cloud. And it's one of those things where, when they made their initial decision, all they were thinking about was security. They weren't thinking about data loss. It just didn't even cross their minds. And now that their scope of requirements is bigger, they're like, yeah, we're going to go to the cloud and we're going to figure out how to deal with security because what we can't do is lose data. And it's the same going the other direction. Make sure that you know how to get your data off the cloud so that if there is, say a civil or a natural disaster, that you're able to keep moving with on-premise data that is critical to your business. Management of hybrid environments is really tricky. If you do have multiple versions of SharePoint, on-prem or the cloud, managing those as a single service is not possible without out-of-box tools. Even good PowerShell scripts get really tough when you go across farms and from on-prem into the cloud. And so content publication and replication, taking things from on-premise and moving them into the cloud and vice versa, search across both environments, compliance, social, and metadata, all those things are pretty disconnected. So if you have on-premise and Office 365 environments, you're going to have to figure out ways to address those kinds of concerns. How do you provide a real unified search experience? There's a little bit of an answer from Microsoft. There's better answers from third parties. Compliance and social. You may or may not know this, but if your My Sites are, let's say, in your cloud farm and some of your content is in your on-prem farm, your My Sites won't see news feeds from the team sites on-premise or vice versa. They're, at this point, disconnected. Metadata. Metadata in the cloud is completely disconnected from metadata on-premise. So if you add a term to your term store in one place, it's not in the other. And if you do add it to the other, it still isn't the same term because it has a different underlying GUID. So there's a lot of challenges, but none of these, and all of these things should influence your decision, but none of them are necessarily showstoppers. And the good news is, the best thing about SharePoint is the ecosystem that you see down in the expo hall and that you see around you with everyone here who's interested in SharePoint. The SharePoint ecosystem is the best ecosystem of any product I know, and everyone's in it to help each other. So if you're having a problem, the odds are you're going to be able to find someone to help you, unlike a lot of competing products who basically lost a lot of their experts who then became SharePoint experts overnight. So when should you move to the cloud? Well, don't move to the cloud. Don't move up. Move forward. Again, look at each workload, decide what increases value, what decreases risk, and put those in the appropriate place. And again, over time, maybe you'll upgrade into the cloud when things provide value or decrease risk on the upgrade side. So do it workload by workload. And I've been using this term workload repeatedly here, and just to be real clear, when I say workload, I'm talking about something that solves a business problem, a very granular problem, potentially, like a site that allows us to interact with a specific customer. So you might call it a solution, a service, an application, something that solves a business outcome or a business need. And these might be very granular or very big. Enterprise search is a very big workload. Enterprise social, pretty big business workload. But workloads big or small, as they come down the pike and come in from your business, decide what you're doing and where they should go. And this slide is actually taking us back to a point I made earlier about the kinds of workloads that make sense in different clouds. So your private cloud can pretty much do everything right now. Currently, Office 365 has very few features that you can't do on-premise. That's going to change, but right now they're fairly equal. Office 365 is particularly well-suited for team sites, for basic collaboration, depending on the information that you're working with in those team sites. Extranet, for sure. As I mentioned, sharing with external users is free and easy in Office 365. And what I would call user-driven solutions are particularly good in Office 365. And I want to focus on this one for a second. The new app model, which we've all heard about, where you can plug in an app to a team site and all of a sudden get some cool new functionality. The new app model is strategically absolutely the right decision, in my opinion. Microsoft is doing the right things for the right reasons. It's a version 1 of the app model, and we all know what happens when Microsoft releases a version 1. There's going to be some rough edges, there's going to be some complaints, and I can tell you, knowing a lot of developers, that developing for the app model is not yet the beautiful experience they'd like it to be. So there's definitely some rough edges. But so that means you might not overnight transform your development team from doing full trust solutions to doing apps. That might be a little bit slower of a process for you, as it is for many of my customers. But when you look out at the broader ecosystem, there are some ridiculously cool apps out there. I'll mention a couple. AvePoint, which I'm doing the book signing in this afternoon, has 2 apps that I think are world-changing from a work perspective. One of them is a calendar and task synchronization app that basically allows you to take all of your task lists across Exchange and SharePoint and all of your calendars across Exchange and SharePoint on-prem and cloud and synchronize them with each other. So that you have a unified task list and a unified calendar that has two-way synchronization, and you can really see what it is you're supposed to be doing. That's ridiculously cool. Another one is their Meetings app. Now, all of us have meetings. For the history of business, we've had meetings. And meetings are always difficult to arrange and organize, and more difficult to keep track of. What's the agenda going to be? What did we talk about? What decisions did we make? What do we have to talk about next time? Why did we make these decisions? So you have a timeline of everything you've been doing, what was done when, what has to be done by whom, and this meeting app does that. It's ridiculously cool. It's a way to solve the very typical problems that we all have with meetings. So those things are apps. They're very, very valuable, and there's a lot of other super cool apps, Nintex workflows and all kinds of other things up in the App Store. For you to support apps in your on-premise environment, you first of all need SharePoint 2013, which many of us are not at yet. Secondly, you need to do stuff with DNS and with other infrastructures like SSL that will take you time. So for you to do apps on-premise is not going to be a day one project for you. In the cloud, it's on. So if you want to give users a way to solve business problems that there are already apps out there to solve, having those business workloads, having those team sites in the cloud mean that they can self-serve their own solutions and just go to the App Store and find these apps. And right now, most of the apps are free because the traction in the App Store is really low and vendors are trying to get people to use it. So you can get some ridiculously good deals right now. So those user-driven solutions where you really do want to empower your business to solve its own problems, put them in the cloud. Because Office 365 has the app model, you don't have to worry about it, and Microsoft manages it for you. And then there's Azure VMs. And I think Azure VMs and other similar products from other companies, the infrastructure as a service models are really well suited for public-facing websites, if you're going to do it on SharePoint. Because Office 365 public-facing websites, and doing it yourself means you're going to be having to worry about your firewall and access and all that stuff. So put them in Azure VMs, and you can scale them real easily. Also, Azure VMs are great for small farms, for remote users or projects. So let's say you've got a remote team in Melbourne, Australia. You want to give them a way to upload and download documents and collaborate with each other, but you don't want to support an on-premise SharePoint farm in that location. Give them an Azure VM or an Office 365 tenancy. Dev environments, especially now that there's MSDN credits and you're being charged per minute and you're not being charged when the VM is off, your dev VMs are basically going to be free when you do all that math. Disaster recovery, now this is a wonderful opportunity for Azure VMs where you can take your on-premise Hyper-V VMs, replicate them into Azure VMs. It's actually very easy to do, and the day your site has a real significant issue, you just spin up your Azure VMs. Disaster, and you haven't been paying for them because they've been off, basically, except for when you've been replicating and updating data. Very, very cool. And then customer third-party apps where you really need something that requires a full trust solution. Obviously, that won't sit in Office 365. Put it in an Azure VM. So there's some very good workloads for each of those clouds. Microsoft, as I mentioned, does want you in their cloud. The pricing that they're going after right now is super aggressive. I have customers that, based on their existing contracts with Microsoft, are being offered $1 per user upgrades to Office 365. So they can do everything they've ever done on-premise and Office 365 for $1 per user. That is a no-brainer for those customers. They're not even thinking twice. They're just adding a zero to the contract and calling it a day. There are many alternatives, though. So don't forget there is Rackspace and fpweb.net and other players in this space, as well as other non-SharePoint products. The tools and the guidance are definitely lacking and missing right now. The Microsoft got the service up. It's actually amazing what they've built. I'm constantly impressed. But there's still missing tools and guidance about how we get there. The journey is inevitable, though, so start really thinking about it and looking at your workloads and deciding what platform they go on. 2010, 2013, on-premise, cloud, different flavors of the cloud. And address the challenges of hybrid service architecture early on. This is your immediate business challenge. I can guarantee that if you're not already there, within a year or two, you will no longer be able to say, this is my SharePoint 20XX farm. You're going to and this is all we have. You're going to have a hybrid service model. There's no way to avoid it. The whole service world, even if you extend it to apps, means you're going to be managing a lot of stuff. Figure out what it's going to take to make that possible. Inventory and start tracking what you're doing so at a bare minimum, you know what you've got in your environment. And over time, I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of third parties stepping into this space of how do you keep track of and manage and secure your environment when your environment is now exploded and sits on servers all over the internet and all over the world. It's going to be a hard thing to deal with. And architect your on-premise implementations as close as possible to match the cloud. Microsoft has guidance about how you architect SharePoint 2013. Their guidance is specifically designed so that it's easier for you to take advantage of new features and move to Office 365 when the time comes. Their guidance isn't necessarily always perfect for you and your business needs, so you need to read what they give you and really also read competing opinions and make sure that you're being thoughtful about it. But where possible, you want to architect your on-premise environment to reflect Office 365. And as you move forward with customizations, where possible, stop doing full trust, stop doing sandbox, start doing app models and service-oriented architectures. It's not always going to be easy or possible, but where you can do, because that is the world of the future, and if the sooner you start doing it, the better. So what you end up with is a real hybrid world. Different clouds, Office 365, Azure, your on-prem private cloud, different versions of SharePoint, different editions of SharePoint. If you have a small workload that can be supported in Melbourne by a SharePoint Foundation server, use it. Don't pay for the licenses for SharePoint server if you don't have to. But use the things that address your business needs. And then present those to your business as service packages. Here's how you collaborate. Here's how you submit an expense report. Here's how you search. Here's how you socialize with each other. Present those to the business, abstracting the underlying technology, because I guarantee you also the underlying technology is going to change over time. What you use today to support a specific workload will change in a year or two, and as long as the business thinks of it as a business solution rather than as a technical solution, you can be moving the underlying parts while they're still getting their service. So with that, I'd like to say, as we say in Hawaiian, mahalo, thank you for coming, and a hui ho, see you soon. I am going to take some time for questions. We've got a couple of minutes here for additional questions. I'll leave my contact information up here. Please do fill in evals and get to the related sessions, especially Chris's this afternoon. If you have and the AppPoint booth at 2 p.m. I'll be doing a book signing. So with that, let me see if there is questions that we have time for. Yeah. Yeah, so what are the lead third-party migration tools? There are several players in the space. AvePoint, Metalogix, and Exceller all have migration tools. Those are sort of the lead players in the space. Each of them have pluses and minuses, but those are sort of the big players. Anyone else using other big ones that I didn't mention? Sorry? AvePoint, Exceller, and Dell, which used to be Quest, and Metalogix was the other one that you didn't have on that list. Other questions? Yeah. Contact information? Yeah. I'll put some cards up here for anyone who wants some. Any other questions? Yeah. Good question. So his question is about business connectivity services and how to connect to other data sources with SharePoint. Right now, the ability of Office 365 to sort of get into your internal data services is limited. That will change over time. That will improve. Then the second part of his question was really about what if your data is already in the cloud? And in that case, what I believe, generally speaking, is going to be the best solution is to use the new cloud app model to expose that data so that it can be consumed by SharePoint. There are certain hooks. I believe I'm not a BCS person, so I better not go too far in answering that. But if you send me an email, I can hook you up with some folks who can address your specific scenario. But OData, for example, is supported now in SharePoint, and if you can access your data that way, it will be possible. And then there are some other ways, but I'm not a BI person, so I won't risk being wrong about that. Thank you. Oh, good question. So this question is, how do you deal with user accounts, identities, and security with the cloud? And depending on the plan you go with, assuming you go with the E-plans, which really you should for a whole lot of reasons, you have the ability to synchronize your directory between on-prem and cloud. So it is effectively creating a second identity, but it's synchronized with your on-prem. There's no different password. Depending on how you set things up, a user may or may not see an initial sign-in credential, but it will be their same account that they use in their domain. Good question. So her question is, I mentioned that Office 365 doesn't have content search. Let me clarify that. Office 365 does have search, but there's a new feature in SharePoint 2013 called content search, which allows you to do a couple of things like, you've got pages of information that different teams have created, and they've tagged it to publish on the intranet. Over on your intranet, you have a content search web part that goes and grabs all that content and shows it on the intranet in a single location. That content search, it used to be called content by search, is not in the cloud. And another place it's used for is like product catalog scenarios where you've got product catalogs of all the different types of laptops, desktops, and tablets, and your content search can present a page that shows you just your desktops altogether or just your laptops. So it's a new subset of search that is about pulling content from multiple places into a single presentation. That's what is not currently in Office 365. But normal search is there, and it's quite good, actually. Good question. How does blob externalization? Well, and what specifically are you thinking about? Is it a block to upgrade? Is that kind of what you're wondering about? Yeah. So if you're doing blob externalization, you can upgrade on premise. You have to make sure that you've worked with the vendor who is providing your blob externalization to make sure that they are ready for SharePoint 2013. And I think at this point most of them are. And certainly if you're using FileStream, which is Microsoft's out of box, that won't be a problem. So you can upgrade. As long as you're using RBS. If you use EBS, which it was introduced first in 2007 and continued to be supported in 2010, EBS is no longer supported in 2013. If you're using RBS, which came out during 2010, you can upgrade no problem. You just attach your content databases. They already have all the pointers to your blobs, and those will be accepted. And then just make sure that your provider, either the FileStream provider or the third party, is ready to do what it needs to do. Now, that takes care of your on-prem. Once you move it to the cloud, you're going to be using a migration tool or a script or whatever you do, and that will grab all the data and upload it as a single chunk with the blob and the metadata to Office 365 when that time comes. Is that a good enough answer for you? Yeah, that works. All right, feel free to come up and ask me more, too, because I've spent quite a bit of time with blob externalization. Oh, are we done? All right, cool. I'm being pushed off the stage. It's a good time. Thank you, guys. And